Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over your hurricane season forecast for this summer. Technically the hurricane season is from June 1st to November 30th, but this year the National Hurricane Center will be issuing updates for the Atlantic hurricane basin starting on May 15th. So throughout that entire time frame is when this forecast is valid for. We're going to be going over your sea surface temperature anomaly forecast, your wind shear forecast, and also your activity forecast. And then at the very end of the video, we're going to be going over my overall forecast, and then also the numerically how many storms I am expecting to move through parts of the Atlantic. So let's get right into it here, and let's start off with your current wind shear map and what I'm expecting in terms of wind shear. I'm expecting below normal wind shear anywhere in this light blue, which covers the bottom half of the Atlantic basin from the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and eastward all the way to Africa and the areas in the eastern Atlantic. That's where I'm expecting less wind shear than normal. We are in a La Nina pattern, so that's typically when we do see less wind shear, and wind shear is what can help destroy storms. So of course, if you have less of it, then storms have less things to be worried about in terms of things that can actually break it down. So wind shear really does help break down storms. If you don't have any wind shear, the storms are just going to keep on growing and growing and growing. And wind shear is really something that can help development, and also it can help these storms strengthen. So you really you would want it to be above normal to not see too many hurricanes. But unfortunately, we have the complete opposite due to this La Nina, which typically shuts off the winds from the west and creates less wind shear over the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, pretty much the entire bottom half of the Atlantic. Here's where I'm expecting even less wind shear in the second color, and this is going to be for the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. As you get further west, closer to Mexico, and also some of the areas in Central America, that's where you typically see the least wind shear in a La Nina type pattern. So that's where I'm expecting even less wind shear. And then the third layer of less wind shear is going to be in the western half of the Gulf of Mexico, and that's very typical for La Nina. Typically, the closer you are to the Pacific Ocean is where you're going to be seeing the least wind shear. So in the western half of the Gulf of Mexico, I am expecting the least wind shear out of anywhere in the Atlantic. But here's where I'm expecting more wind shear on the opposite end, and this is actually also quite typical for a La Nina pattern. By the way, I will be updating this forecast more than once over the next few weeks and months. More shear over the northern half of the Atlantic, from the mid-Atlantic northward all the way through the central and northern Atlantic. I'm expecting more wind shear, and this is quite typical. Even last year when we had a couple storms actually move up the east coast, and you would think that we had less wind shear, but it's actually the opposite. We had a ton of wind shear over the northeast and the mid-Atlantic wind. Winter storm Isaias, for example, and a couple other of those storms moved up the east coast. We had a ton of wind shear, and that's why they actually had to really fight against the wind shear, and it actually helped to weaken the storms from becoming some sort of big hurricane, which it could have been if there was no wind shear. But there was actually quite a bit of wind shear that helped lower the intensity of the storm, although they were still quite impactful and damaging, unfortunately. So we did have a lot of wind shear yesterday. We were also in a La Nina pattern, and it looks like that's going to continue, especially over the northern half of the Atlantic, and then over this subsection of the north central and northeastern Atlantic. This is where I'm expecting the most wind shear out of anywhere this year. Here's where I'm expecting above normal storm activity, and this covers the entire Atlantic basin because I am expecting above normal storm activity this year, and that's going to, again, cover pretty much the entire Atlantic except for the northern part of the Atlantic, which typically doesn't see any storms anyway, so it's not really too applicable to that region. So this is where I'm expecting my first shade of above normal. So anywhere in this region, you'll be slightly above normal. Not a whole lot, but you might see one or two storms here or there. Here's where I'm expecting it to be moderately above normal, and that's going to be over the Caribbean and back through the Gulf of Mexico, as well as along the southeast coast as well. So unfortunately, in those areas, I am expecting a moderately above normal activity, and then the area that I'm expecting the most activity is going to be centered over southern Florida and also the Caribbean and the Bahamas. So unfortunately, in these areas, I think it'll be most active. Not saying that necessarily you're going to see huge storms, but I just think that you're going to be repeatedly hit, maybe a couple times in a row with a tropical storm or low-end hurricane. And again, just because you see more activity, you can see a lot of weak tropical depressions, but it doesn't mean that's going to be you could even have 5 tropical depressions that aren't as dangerous or catastrophic as one category 3 or category 4 or category 5. So hopefully we're on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of how much storms we actually get and how many and how intense the storms are, but unfortunately it's not looking too good just yet, because we do seem to have prime conditions for hurricane activity over this area around the Caribbean, the Bahamas, and also near Florida and parts of the Southeast. Here's what I'm expecting in terms of the water temperatures, because this is also very, very important. You typically need to have warm water temperatures to support some storms. Typically, you want to have them in the upper 70s, or usually you want it to be in the 80s. You can support a storm weakening gradually in upper 70s or mid 70s water temperatures. Anything cooler than that, you really need to really warm it up a little bit more. But once you get into the 80s, you can really support a good hurricane, and it looks like we will have that over much of the Atlantic, slightly above normal water temperatures over this entire region. Here's that second area of above average, that moderately above average region, and that's going to be for areas along the southeast coast, the Gulf of Mexico, the Bahamas, Caribbean, and all of those areas is where I'm expecting moderately above normal temperatures in terms of the sea surface temperatures. And if we look at the most above average region, that's going to be, again, kind of hovered over that same area that I was expecting the most activity, and that's going to be a big correlation. When you have more warm air along the surface of the water, it's able to rise more, create more storms, and that unorganized area of storminess that will create will eventually become hurricanes and just tropical storms and storms in general that can of course become tropical in nature. So when you do have warmer temperatures, not only can they create storms, but they can also help strengthen the storm. So you really don't want to see that, but unfortunately that is what we're dealing with this year in terms of water temperatures, especially with the La Nina. It should help warm up these sea surface temperatures quite a bit, and it typically does help quite a bit with warming the sea surface temperatures up. So here's the overall forecast, and we're going to start filling this in for you guys. Warmer and active over the Gulf of Mexico, the western half, and also back through the southern Caribbean, and this is where I think the sea surface temperatures will be slightly warmer to moderately warmer than normal. And also, I think it will be fairly active. You'll see a little bit more activity than normal, but I don't think it'll be a huge amount of activity. But over that area, over the southeast coast, back through areas around Florida and the Caribbean and the Bahamas. Unfortunately, I do think this is going to be the most active region, or one of the most active regions. Again, not saying that you're going to see some devastating storm, just saying that you're going to see multiple storms or a high quantity of storms. But again, they could just be all tropical depressions and tropical storms, which of course we'll be hoping and praying for. And hopefully we don't see anything catastrophic. But again, it just takes one big storm to really cause a lot of damage. It doesn't necessarily have to be 5 tropical storms in one season. If those tropical storms don't cause damage, then it's really not a big deal. But you could have maybe one category 4 or category 5 storm that causes equal or more damage than those 5 storms combined. So it's really all about the intensity of the storms rather than the amount of storms generally. A couple storms along the East Coast. I think you will see a few storms that do manage to move their way up along the East Coast. It's all going to be centered around where the high pressure around the Bermuda area is set up, where your Bermuda high pressure is. If it's a little bit too far to the east, then they're going to be going all out to sea. If it's a little bit too far to the west, then all the storms will go into the southeast coast and then move inland, and they won't really impact the East Coast too much. So it has to be in that prime position for that to happen. I think it does move around during the summer, so I think you might see 1 or 2 storms that get caught right in that perfect time frame when it's moving around to the perfect position, and I think you might see a couple storms that do move up the East Coast in that fashion. average conditions over the central part of the Atlantic, really nothing too noteworthy in this area, and typically that area is stuck underneath the Bermuda high pressure, which of course centers around Bermuda and areas south of there, and it really just helps circulate the flow of energy to the south, and then eventually brings it further to the north. So this area typically gets cut out of the storm activity anyway, plus there's not really any islands or population within this area to really worry about in terms of a landfall. There's a few smaller islands, but luckily, for the most part, the central Atlantic is quite inactive in terms of their population. Warmer conditions just generally over the lower half of the Atlantic. And this is really the only noteworthy thing in this area. I also think that there will be more storm production over this area. I do think you will see a few more storms move through this area and actually start off in this area. Typically, you see most of your storms off the west coast of Africa, and then they head further to the east, and that's how they strengthen. They have that entire journey across the Atlantic, and I think we will see, due to those warmer temperatures, a bit more of a quick intensification for many of those storms. Finally, here's what I'm expecting in terms of the numerical numbers for how many storms I'm expecting. 17 to 22 total storms here, 13 to 17 tropical storms. I don't think you're going to see too many big storms in terms of these catastrophic types of storms. I think it's going to be kind of like what we saw last year, where we did see a couple, especially later on, of very powerful storms, unfortunately. But you went through the first part of the season, and you were dealing with mostly just weak tropical storms. They were going out to sea. We saw a ton of those. We actually broke the record for the most tropical storms, or actually, the most tropical storms, most storms in general in one hurricane season, but it wasn't the most destructive season because we didn't see too many of those category 4 or 5s that actually made it onto land. I believe we had 1 or 2. But luckily, for the most part, we were quite lucky last year with so many storms. You would expect a few of them, maybe 4 or 5, to make landfall and to become. Well, we did see 4 or 5, but 4 or 5 big major ones of maybe category 3, category 4 status. We did not see that, luckily. So we're hoping for that this year, and I think it will happen. I think we're going to see more tropical storms, 13 to 17 tropical storms. But then you look at the category 1 to 3, only 2 to 5. I really don't think there will be too many. I think probably pushing the upper end of that, so maybe 3, 4, 5 category 1 to 3s, and then category 4 to 5. You really don't want to lose that. You really want to hope that we minimize that threat, but I can't rule out the possibility that we see 1 or 2. So I'm going to go for 0 to 2 category 4s to 5s. There is that possibility that, of course, we get none, but there's also that possibility that we do get really hit hard with 1 to 2. And again, that doesn't mean that they're all going to make landfall. They could just go out to sea and be a strong category 5, but it's a fish storm. It's not really impacting any land. So we would hope for that in that scenario. And I will be tracking them with the new hurricane graphics that we have for this year. So make sure you are staying tuned. Make sure you have your notifications turned on. And I will be on the latest hurricane information. I will be discussing it with you guys and telling you all about the storms that we are dealing with when we do get into that summer time frame and the hurricane time frame. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Please consider liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.